Welcome to the EchoCast. I am Vaughn, and this is a podcast about video game news, speculation, reviews, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week, we'll chat about the PlayStation 5 Pro rumors, even more Xbox ABK news, Resident Evil 4 Remake reactions, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and if you're on Spotify or iTunes, please review the show. On YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment down below with your thoughts, your questions, or just to say hello. A huge thanks to supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 a month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. By the way, due to a change, those ad-free episodes will actually be on Spotify soon-ish. Patreon and Spotify are teaming up. As soon as that's available, I will let you know. Gaming news. Let's talk about it. This week we have 12 stories. Story number 1, PlayStation 5 Pro rumors. As reported by Insider Gaming, which is run by Tom Henderson and a bunch of other people now, there is a rumor that Sony is currently working on putting out a new PS5, and it will be a PS5 Pro. Now, the rumors about this are that it's going to be kind of a 2-for-1, where it's going to basically be a slim model, and it's going to have power enhancements that will be focused on ray tracing. The rest of the idea is that it's going to replace the current SKU. So when they did the PS4 Pro and they did the Xbox One X, they kept selling Xbox Ones and PS4s. So it was kind of like an entry-level console and then an enthusiast level console. It doesn't seem like that's what's going to happen here. And it sounds like they're going to replace the current PS5 SKU with this new system, and that will just be the system moving forward. And that kind of leads me to be very skeptical about the details of this. I do believe they're going to put out a new system. I wouldn't even be surprised if they do replace the SKU. I am putting my money on that this is going to be a slim system, that it's going to be a smaller, more revision of the PS5. I know some people like the way that thing looks, but it is gigantic and awkward. And I mean, you know, Sony would never say it, but I think the design was honestly a mistake. I think it was just it was them smelling their own farts, I think, a little bit, and being like, we can make this amazing. And in ways, it's obviously a very interesting looking device, but from a we need to put this device into people's homes standpoint, I think it was a gigantic failure. So my guess is they're going to put out something a little more pedestrian looking, and it's probably what they're going to do moving forward. And the biggest bonus to Sony about it is it's probably going to be smaller. It's probably going to have fewer precious metals and materials in it, and it's going to be lighter, which means they can ship more in one cargo container, which saves them a ton of money. And if they're able to use newer chips that are the same speed as the old chip, but they're smaller, which means they can have more on one die when they're making them, that will save them money as well. I'm betting that this is going to be a cost savings move and not some big, like, oh, it's got this big power boost. Maybe they'll suss some power out of it with some optimization or something, increasing efficiency. But more than anything, I think they're going to be taking away. I think they're going to be, taking away from the cooling solution and stuff like that, which they've already done. The PlayStation 5 being created today is different than the one at launch. It's like 50% of the metal in the heatsink. It's much smaller. because they realized they over-engineered it and they put out a new one, which seems like it's fine still. So this story has been really interesting. I just don't, and I agree with a lot of the reporting I've seen. I just don't see a need yet for some updated systems. I don't know if there's been a PS5 game yet that's been released that could only be on the PS5. I know people want to say Ratchet and Clank. Since that game came out, I believe either Digital Foundry or someone else showed that whole Rift system that they claimed had to be on the extremely fast PS5 SSD could run on an old hard drive. And so that was just marketing, which is fine, but we're still yet to see them even push the current systems to their limits in the sense of like making a game that pushes this generation to its limit. Specifically, my best example would be like The Last of Us 2 with the PS4. That game pushed that system to its absolute limit. They used every trick and every modicum of power they could to make that game look like one of the best games ever made. And it was because they had the time and experience, and they haven't had that yet with PS5 because they're still making all their games, and Xbox as well. They're still making all their games work with the last gen. I think that's changing with the Spider-Man game coming out. I'm fairly certain, but we'll have to wait and see. So I think that the current systems still have legs and that we won't see some big revision. I wouldn't be surprised if the PS6 comes out and they never do a big revision. I could be wrong about that, but I don't know if we'll see a big speed boost like what we saw with the PS4. That does bring up questions about what Nintendo and Xbox are going to do. I think Nintendo's plans are completely obvious and at the same time completely mysterious. The assumption is they'll just put out a Switch 2 sooner than later. I think that's the safest bet. I've seen some people propose that they may put out like a slightly revised Switch and then put out another console, like typical console that is more powerful and that is more competitive with the PlayStation and Xbox, because to this day the Switch struggles to bring over a lot of third-party games. It can bring over a decent amount of them. It relies a lot on streaming to do that, which is okay. Nintendo isn't exactly known for the best online system in the gaming industry, so it'll be interesting to see what they do. I don't think Nintendo really cares about playing the game with Sony and Xbox, though. I think they've found their own little corner of the market that is very big and highly lucrative, and I think they're just going to keep rolling with that. So I'm expecting just a Switch 2, another tablet that's very powerful, that will probably be more comparable to the other systems, but won't be, unfortunately, but we'll see. And then Xbox, what are they going to do? My hot take about Xbox is I actually don't think they'll do like a 1X equivalent. I think they're just going to put out a new system in like 2026. And I say that not because I think it's like their big next gen machine, quote unquote, but because I don't think they're going to try to play the gen game anymore. I don't think Xbox is going to try to play generations anymore. If you look at the way they handled even this last release, they have released a lot of games on the last system. They have an extremely smooth backwards compatible system. They even had a system where on their own, without developers needing to be involved, were able to bring a bunch of old games to 60 FPS, improve the graphics, and do things like that purely off of their own systems. They seem to really care about having a smooth backwards compatibility system. And we know, and I don't think they've deployed this yet, but on like the Xbox One, once they do start releasing Xbox Series only games, the Xbox One will still be able to play them through the cloud. So they can utilize their old systems using their own cloud servers to continue playing games that are no longer meant for that hardware. And so to me, it wouldn't surprise me at all if like every 5 years they put out a new significantly faster system and then phase out the system from like the one before that's 10 years old at that point. And then, but even that system would still be able to play the new games via the cloud. But then that would kind of encourage people like, hey, if you want the real experience, you can upgrade. But if you don't want to upgrade, that's totally cool. You can keep doing what you're doing. And it would be a more PC upgrade look in some ways where, not that everyone replaces their PC every 5 years, but it would feel less like the Xbox 6. And instead, it would just be the new Xbox. I have a Series X still, and it plays games just fine. I can still play them at 30 FPS, 1080p. But if I get that new one, I can play at 4K 60 or 4K 20 or like 120. So I'm really curious to see how they move forward. I 100% see Sony sticking. They're going to release a PS6 eventually, according to documents released around 2027, because Sony really cares about their console units sold. That number is extremely important to them. You see in the way they report on it, you see in the way they treat things with their exclusives and things like that, where you can kind of see that Xbox has like accepted their fate. We aren't going to outsell hardware over Sony. They're going to compete, especially with the Series S available. But like I think they've just recognized like, hey, we can't really compete with that. They have such a big player base. They have such good games. We are still playing catch up. So instead of trying to catch up with them on hardware sales, which is going to be very hard, they're dedicating their money to getting exclusives, to buying studios, to Game Pass, to things like that. And with that focus, I think they can worry less about keeping up on generations and just do that however they want. And honestly, especially if they did that and say they released a new Xbox in like 2025 or 2026, which would be a year or two ahead of the PS6, well, Sony's going to freak out because they do care about keeping up with the generations. But this whole thing with Xbox, it may not be as powerful as the PS6, but it'll be out first, and it will be more powerful than the Series X. I just think it's all very interesting. I'm really curious to see how this plays out moving forward, and I think it'll be fun. But we won't linger on this story any longer. Story number 2. Hey, we're talking about Xbox again and kind of Sony. Xbox keeps signing 10-year deals with companies you've never heard of. So we had a few streaming providers this week get deals with Xbox to carry their games for the next 10 years. The initial reaction to these stories was to kind of laugh and brush them off as, oh, they're just trying to play good for the regulators. But these companies they signed with have like millions of users, and one of them is the company that does the streaming for Nintendo's games that it can't play, so it streams them instead. I believe The Witcher is like that. And so those deals aren't not a big deal. So as easy as it was to kind of laugh it off, I think it should be taken seriously. And I think those deals are more than just icing to try to make the regulators happy, even though it's very obviously that also. So I think it's cool. There was also kind of an interesting thing released by one group of regulators where they released these letters that had been written to them by individuals or studios in the industry. Only one of them named themselves, but they all basically were like, Game Pass is awesome, and Xbox has really made it so we can make games and not worry as much and get a lot of exposure. And the way that they advertised our games gets us more sales on Xbox, even though Sony has more units. Even though they have more users, we still sell more on Xbox because they do a better job of putting us out there. So, I think there's been some sentiment from certain people in various communities of, that Game Pass is bad for studios and things like that. We're still yet to see if the Game Pass model really works for like AAA studios, but it seems pretty obvious at this point that for the indie scene, Series X or the Series X's Game Pass is just really good, and it's keeping some studios alive, and it's allowing them to do things they want to do, and it's getting them attention they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So this whole thing's been interesting. I believe the EU put out their judgment on this deal for May. Some people think that's because Xbox submitted a bunch of concessions to them this week, so they're going to take time to review it and then make a final order or judgment, I guess. We still haven't heard from the CMA in Britain, but it seems like, especially those moves with the streaming studios, a big focus of these regulators has been how Xbox and Game Pass will be a huge threat to smaller streaming providers if those providers don't have access to the Xbox ecosystem, and that's why they're signing these deals. I mean, they're making moves directly answering to the concerns of the regulators, and they seem pretty dedicated to pushing this thing through the end. It seems like everyone at this point has accepted this deal will happen. It's just there's going to be more theatrics before then because everyone wants to get their piece, I guess. Story number 3, Resident Evil 4 Remake. Reviews have dropped. The Metacritic is 93. Pretty dang impressive. Another entry in Capcom's almost blemishless releases over the last few years, starting, I think I want to say like Resident Evil 2. That remake was a kickoff to a pretty good series of games for them. I got a chance to play the demo for Resident Evil 4, and it is gorgeous. It looks so good. It plays well. I really enjoyed it, even though those games aren't really my thing. I'm too weak-willed to stick with them, which is why I'm struggling on whether to buy this or not. Probably leaning away, but I definitely want to watch some playthroughs because it just looks great and I want to see how it plays out. I've seen playthroughs of the original Resident Evil 4, and so I am kind of curious to see how things have changed and how they haven't. So, big ups to this team who made this remake. They, once again, we're seeing a big difference between remasters and remakes. And the remakes have just been really, really good. From the Metroid game that came out recently to this Resident Evil 4 to the Dead Space remake. We've got a bunch of companies doing these remakes the right way. They could be doing these and doing them badly, and obviously that would upset people a lot. But I think people are relaxing to the idea of these remakes as they continue to make like legitimate, really impressive remakes. So we will see if they continue that. I've seen some back and forth about whether they'll try to do Resident Evil 5, which, if you aren't aware, took the series into a very weird, a very arcadey, silly place that went on until about Resident Evil 7. So it had a couple games that were weird. I believe Resident Evil Code Veronica or Resident Evil 0 are also candidates that could be remade that people are a little more excited about, it seems, than Resident Evil 5. Because Resident Evil 5 would more than likely just be a complete remake, like even of like the story. They would probably keep story beats similar, but the way the game plays out and the story is told, I imagine would be changed completely. It's very silly. Story number 4, which is ironic because it's about Diablo 4's beta test. So that came out today for people who pre-ordered or ate just the hilariously disgusting double down sandwich from KFC, which handed out codes for this beta. I was able to play for about an hour and a half today. The servers are getting slammed. There's queues everywhere. It's hard to get in and play. But what I haven't played since Diablo 2. Man, it felt so good. The way they're doing some storytelling and some world building is really great. It's very satisfying. It feels good. It looks good. I mean, I'm playing on a Series X. I'm overjoyed, and it seems like everyone's complaining about not being able to get in. But the people I've seen who have also gotten to play some, it's going to be good. I'm happy for that team to be able to, Blizzard has a stigma. Half the reason some people want this acquisition to go through is to just get them away from Bobby Kotick, and to hopefully allow Xbox to put in some better leadership and give these teams some more freedom. And it would be really cool to have this on Game Pass. So I'm really impressed by it. It seems like everyone else who has played it is as well. I don't want to talk too much about it until it actually comes out, and I'll talk more about my own personal review of the game itself. But if you can get into the beta, especially without pre-ordering, I would do it. It's very cool. It reminds me of Diablo 2, where when I did briefly touch 3 did something different, and it just didn't work, at least not for me. So I highly suggest checking out the Diablo 4 beta if you're able to. Story number 5. Xbox is participating in E3. Kind of. So we found out this week that the Xbox showcase that will take place before the Starfield showcase will be part of E3's digital week. That's a pretty big deal. All of the sky is falling journalists over the last couple months have all been freaking out about how terrified they are that the big three won't be at E3, even though they haven't really been in years anyways. But it seems like Xbox is throwing them at least a small bone to be able to slap their E3 label onto this big showcase. And I'm all for it. I'm a known E3 simp. I want it to do well. I especially want it to do well because I think Jeff Keighley's event, especially Summer Game Fest, has just been way overrated, and that I thought it was an extremely mediocre showcase they had last year. Not just the games, but even the way he presented it. Like, there was literally a developer who sat on stage and just kissed Jeff's butt for 2 minutes, and it was weird. And he put so many commercials into this. I get it, he has to pay the bills, but I don't know. His events are cool. The Game Awards are amazing, but his Gamescom event and Summer Game Fest, I thought were really lacking last year. And I want to see E3 do well to give him legit competition so that they can make each other better or even work together again. I'm not expecting that. Jeff throws a lot of shade towards E3, and it's, in my opinion, really cringy and childish most of the time. But it is what it is. He has reason to be annoyed with them. It sounds like that relationship ended very turbulently. But I don't know. I find Jeff to be a little pretentious, and I think he's been kind of handed the crown without really earning it yet. But we'll see. I do think that if this E3 goes well, it sounds like it's going to be well represented by third-party studios like Ubisoft, Konami, Capcom, the big ones, right? If it goes well, I think we'll definitely see Xbox at E3 next year, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Nintendo as well. I think this year will be kind of a prove it thing. We have ReedPop, which is a group that does the PAX shows. They're taking over running E3 from the ESA. ESA still owns it, but they're allowing ReedPop to do their own thing. And it sounds like they're doing a bunch of good stuff. I saw this week that they're creating a bar and a big meeting, a casual meeting place in the middle of the venue. That's a big deal. Because if you haven't been there before, E3 is very much a just a cesspool of smelly people, and then people desperately trying to find food in the surrounding area. If they add this kind of like bar scene in, where a developer can meet up with another developer or a publisher or something, and they can just go grab a drink and have a chat about stuff, some good stuff could come from that, and I think that would be a good environment to have available. Yeah, I'm very impressed by what I've seen. There were a lot of rumors that Repop was like way behind on getting stuff set up, and the fact that we're finally now seeing, places confirming they'll be there. This partnership with Xbox, some of this other stuff, it seems like they're finally getting caught up maybe, and we'll start seeing more announcements about E3 really soon. So I'm excited for it. I'm excited for both in all events. And I'm really hoping that E3 can kind of start climbing back to their previous stature. The sixth story today is the Division 2 has had its 4-year anniversary as of, I believe it was Thursday. The Division 2, if you've been here since then, this podcast started as a Division podcast, and it transitioned not as long ago as you think, but still a while ago, to being just a general gaming podcast / kind of like a Mass Effect podcast. I'm sorry, everyone. The Division 2, gave me opportunities I would have never had otherwise. I got to go see it be revealed at E3 in 2018. I got to go out and play it early in San Francisco in this just crazy event that had a bunch of journalists and stuff that I had no business sharing a room with. It was so cool. And the game coming out and getting to play it and the discourse around it and the highs and the lows of the releases and other stuff. Has just been really great. And I know some people like to throw shade at Division 2. I think it's the vastly superior game to the first one. I think it's way more fun to play. I think the enemies are more interesting. I just wish it had more and better content. And I would say the same thing about the first game. So it's a shame that I feel like Massive really has this like really fundamentally great game that just can't keep up. We've seen similar situations with like Halo and things like that. I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. We have Division 2, Heartland coming at some point, I imagine. We have the mobile game, which I don't really care about. I think that's stupid. We've had books coming out. We supposedly still have a movie one day. We'll see about that. Love it or hate it, the Division 2, at least for me, has been a huge influence on my adulthood. As whether I'm proud of that or not, still is up for the count, I guess. But I just, I'm really proud of that team. I've gotten to have conversations that I wish they could be public, that would explain why things with the Division 2 have never really gone the way that most people think it should have. I easily think that with the right leadership, the Division could be as big as Destiny. I just, Bungie is 100% dedicated to Destiny being good. And I think Ubisoft actually kind of doesn't like the Division, or at least some people in upper management actively dislike the franchise and have maybe in some ways made sure that it never really grows as much as it could. Maybe I'm guessing, maybe I'm being silly. I don't know. You can judge. Okay, story number 6. Starfield has gotten a rating in Australia. This is for their adults, their content rating system, and it got a R18 plus, which is the highest and most severe rating a game can get in Australia. This has to be taken with some jest or whatever. Australia is like hilariously strict about the games and the content they'll allow in to be sold. I can't remember the story off the top of my head, but I remember relatively recently that they went to like extreme lengths to not allow a game to have a rating that is more beneficial for buyers, right? Like this 18 plus rating, it will tell people, oh, cool, Starfield's going to be like an adult game, but it also means a lot of people won't have easy access to it. So we'll have to see how that goes. One of the biggest tragedy we saw in this rating is that their rating that they use to judge whether like relationships or sexual situations are too graphic basically confirms that there's no sex in Starfield. So if there's aliens, you can't bang them, you can't go after the human NPCs, you're just going to be a eunuch just saving the galaxy or something. We still don't really know what Starfield's about, and I'm totally cool with that. Story number 8. Square Enix is still pushing NFTs. They are going hard. They basically complained about how bad Forspoken did, and then they also fired their CEO, who everyone had been panning for pushing NFTs too hard. Well, they have now fired him because he didn't push them enough, and they're looking to replace him with someone who is like deep in the NFT Web3 world. And so Square Enix, things are probably going to get worse there before they get better. Let's just roll with that. At least that's my opinion. Story number 9. Stalker 2 has had its data hacked. So a Russian social media group or something has confirmed or at least said that they hacked into some employee accounts for the Stalker 2 devs and were able to steal a bunch, like multiple gigs of videos and files and screenshots and pictures. And they're threatening to release all of this data if the Stalker 2 devs don't localize language to Russia. Now, something to know about the developers of Stalker 2 is they, I believe it's GSC Games, is based in Kiev, Ukraine. And they had to move their studio to, I believe, the Czech Republic, I believe, is where they're at now. And they've had multiple employees conscripted into the army, and I believe at least one of them has died in combat. So it seems like they have decided not to localize the language into Russia because there's some animosity there. And then this group, which these hacking groups, they always portray themselves as being like independent groups and things like that. They almost always have an alliance or some aligning with the Russian government, the FSB. This is right in their playbook to do some of this kind of economic terrorism and things like that. I don't want to just assume that. I have seen speculation of that from people who are more in the know. But I guess what it all comes down to is basically they threatened to release this stuff if the developer doesn't localize Russian. And the response from the developer was basically a big middle finger and telling them to go F themselves, that they can release that info and they just ask people not to spread it, and that they aren't going to bow down to anyone, especially a bunch of Russians who are probably doing this for nefarious reasons. So, all props to them. I think that's a good response. Again, this is a team of game developers who have lost friends and family and homes and cities and safety and all of this stuff due to a war that shouldn't have ever happened or started, and that will probably be ongoing for quite a while. So I hope everything works out here. I hope these idiots release the info and barely anyone pays attention to them. I was really annoyed with how all of the good publications talked about these people as hackers and criminals who stole this information. I was really freaking bummed when Tom Henderson referred to them as fans, when it was just clear what's happening here. These aren't fans who did this. These are people who are bad actors, even if they're not affiliated with a government. And so, unfortunately, if you look into that person's statements and general attitude towards things, unfortunately, they probably lean more one way than the other, and it's a huge bummer. But I was really happy to see most of the gaming journalists portray the situation correctly as criminal and as, hackers being bad and not a group of rogue fans. Anyways, Story number 10, Naughty Dog's next project. So during a podcast with Kind of Funny, Neil Druckmann, who is in charge of Naughty Dog, and has written and directed The Last of Us, The Last of Us 2, and now the show, talked about their next project. And he was very aloof. He was very, not aloof, he was very mysterious. And everyone's been interpreting it as him saying, basically, they're not doing The Last of Us 3. They are 110% doing The Last of Us 3. Sony loves money. The Last of Us prints money. Come on, give me a break. Maybe they aren't. Maybe they are working on something else. There's been supposed rumors that they're doing like a fantasy game or something. Kiss my booty. They are making The Last of Us 3. Now, I absolutely think if they do The Last of Us 3, that's done. They will wrap that series up, probably like Uncharted is done as well, and they'll move on. But everyone being like, well, if they were doing The Last of Us 3, he would have been more obvious about it. No, he wouldn't. He would say exactly what he said, so everyone's talking about it. So I absolutely think Naughty Dog is working on The Last of Us 3 right now, and we'll see that in a few years. Story number 11, IO Interactive denies any Hitman games coming anytime soon. So I guess there's been a lot of talk about what's going to happen with the Hitman series and IO Interactive. IO is a developer who is independent, has done just incredible work with the Hitman series, and it seems like their main project right now is actually a 007 game. So in the face of that, they've made it pretty clear to people, hey, we aren't making a new Hitman anytime soon. More than likely not until after the 007 game comes out, and then we'll have to see how many resources they need to support that. I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that they are sticking with the 007 game. One interesting thing that came from the story was lots of rumors about people saying that like Xbox or Sony needs to pick up IO. And from a honest standpoint, that's probably true. That would probably be a very, very smart move. IO Interactive seems like one of the best premier studios out there right now. The Hitman game is so good. They've kind of consolidated all of the games into one now. Excellent game. I think this 007 game is going to be so cool, and I continue to see them, have success. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Sony or Microsoft or Amazon or whoever tries to buy them. We'll see. They seem like a studio that values their independence. And so, there's always a check that's big enough, I'm sure, but we'll have to see if that comes to fruition for the IO Interactive team. Story number 12 is a huge bummer. Lance Reddick has passed away. Details have been pretty sparse, and it's not really any of our business anyways, but he was 60 years old. He was the voice of Zavala in Destiny, which is, one of their more famous NPCs that you deal with. He was an iconic actor in film and in gaming. He had a huge social media presence. Literally just like a day or two ago was just making TikToks or whatever, just like one does. And so it's a huge bummer. It's really sad to see someone like that who's such a pillar of multiple industries. Even if he wasn't like an A-list actor, he's like an actor's actor, it seems like, and seems like he was very beloved. What's been most impressive to me is the reaction from the Destiny community, just crazy outpourings of love and crazy just like dedications and memorials. People are going into the game and finding Zavala and like doing like memorials to him and stuff like that. It's if you're not into games, I could see where some people would think it's a bit much, but these people matter, and he was especially interactive with the community. So what was crazy about it is just the day before, during a stream while I was streaming Mass Effect, someone just kind of chimed in like, man, it'd be really cool if Lance Reddick voiced someone in the next Mass Effect. And I remember being like, yeah, that'd be great. And so it's kind of crazy how things work out and how that won't be a thing, and that's a huge bummer. So, you know, think of his family, think of the people he loved, and who loved him, and, you know, just try to, you know, send some good vibes that way, however you can. The final thing here is barely even a story. I do have a couple new videos out. One is about the Sony PS5 Pro I already talked about, so go check that out on YouTube. I also did a Mass Effect video discussing what it's going to be called. There's arguments about whether it's going to be 4 or 5, or if it's going to have a subtitle, and I dive pretty deep into it, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So over on YouTube, look for Bond Diesel, look for my Mass Effect 4 or 5 or something else video, and let me know what you think. We have a couple of listener questions here. If you have your own questions or topics you would like me to cover during next week's show, please let me know in Discord, in the YouTube comments. You can DM me on Twitter, or you can reply in a post I make every week asking for stories and such, at Bond Diesel or at the EchoCast on Twitter. This week we have a couple of questions from Master Prime. The first one being, what piece of concept art would you like to be part of a game, of the actual game? That's so hard to guess. My biggest one would be The Division 1 and 2. It has so much concept art of like situations or locations that like you just I understand why The Division is a looter shooter multiplayer game. But man, when you look at the Division's concept art, you just like wish it was like The Last of Us. You just like wish and pray and hope that it was a gritty story game set in this gritty world. And yeah, unfortunately, instead we have what we have. It's still a great game. I think it could have been much more. And so its concept art definitely makes me pine for The Division to be a different game that would evoke the same emotions. The second question, do you think disc have a future with gaming consoles, or is it just display at this point? I think the disc is going away. I haven't put a disc into a console since the 360. I had an Xbox One, a One X, and now a Series X. I've never stuck a CD in any of them. I've gone all digital, and I think there's a lot more people like me every day. I think people are sick of it. Yeah, I know I don't really own my games. I'm like leasing them from Xbox. Okay. You know, if Xbox goes tits up and I lose all my games, I guess that's on me. But I made a bet on a company that will probably be around much longer than me. And I just think the disc, it's just too slow. And the big issue is even today, and for years now, it's not like the disc actually has the game on it. Half the discs now are basically just a download code that installs like a few megabytes onto your system, and then you download the rest. There are some that do have like an early version of the game, but almost and not even almost every single game now has a day one patch that is sometimes like many gigabytes. So even if they do print the game on the disc, if you try to stick that game in and download it and turn off your internet connection, you're going to play probably a broken mess of a game, if you can even play it offline, right? So I think discs are going away. I think the idea that we've heard that this PS5 Pro Slim, whatever, will have no drive, but will have like a USB 3 plug-in drive if you want one, is probably the way it's going to go. So I think its future is limited. And then, do I prefer in-game cutscenes or pre-rendered cutscenes? I mean, at this point, I like in-game cutscenes because even if they can make the pre-rendered ones like that much better, I think gaming graphics in modern games are so good that I would rather see something that looks like the gameplay than see something that looks enough better that it's weird to go back to the game. So yeah, I'm all about the in-game cutscenes, and I think that's only going to get more popular as systems get more and more powerful. So thank you so much for the questions, Master Prime. And I do ask anyone else who listens, please send in your questions one way or the other, or if there's a topic you want me to cover, whatever, I'll talk about it. The solo podcast experience is tough because the only time I interact with anyone is with you after the show comes out. So give that to me if you want. I want to talk. I want to get input. And there's a few places you can do that: Twitter, Discord, YouTube comments. Hit me up. And that's what we have this week. I want to thank you for listening. I'm happy to get any feedback on the show. If you have it, please give it to me. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel on everything from Twitter to YouTube to Instagram, and technically on Twitch. I'm taking a hiatus from there. But yeah, that's all I have. So until next time.